My name is Richard Angell. I'm the Director of Progress. I'd really like to welcome you to the Labour London Borough of Lambeth, where we are this morning, and it is really great to be joined by so many people. Progress is often seen as the kind of winning wing of Labour, but we are equally concerned with governing as Labour, and that is an important part of what we do. We don't want to win for any old reason or just so we've got the cars and the office and the particular the trappings of power, but because we want to be able to exercise power to change lives for the better. And this is an important part of what we're doing. When I saw the various and rival protesters here earlier today, I said to my staff, it's great, it's like being in government again. But of course, that is the point of today. We are in so many of our communities around the country. You are the people making important decisions over people's lives day in, day out. And that is why we meet today, because when we go forward, we should do so with the insight of the people with Labour values currently with their hands on those levers of power, currently changing people's lives for the better, currently making our communities stronger, fairer and more equal. This is not the first event of this kind that Progress has done. We've done many things involving councillors and tried to put the top of our billings in many ways through. But this is a unique event at bringing together those Labour people in power, debating and sharing together how we do it with, of course, you, fellow Labour Party members, councillors and activists, about how we forge that going forward. I think that's enough from me, but just to say thank you to my staff who've done the great work so I can take all the credit for having organised this today. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the debate. Over to you, Ayesha.
Hello everybody, thanks very much for all being here. Now we meet in very, very difficult, challenging times. You can tell things are tough because there's not even any tea and coffee. And actually I went through to there's sort of lot nice people preparing teas and coffees over there, and I was like, can I have a tea and coffee? And they were like, no. And I was like, but you're making tea and coffee. They're like, not for you, not for Progress. I thought, this is the story of things to come, isn't it? This is life under Tory Britain. And also it's good to see all the protesters here today. And like I said, there's lots of warring kind of factions, and there was a bit of a dodgy incident earlier when somebody from Tusk came running up, and they were really annoyed because they thought that the conference started at 9:15, so they gathered everybody. So like Labour's so disorganised, we can't even coordinate all our like protesting on the left, basically. This is not a good thing. So it's absolutely delightful to be here today. As Richard said, this is a conference which is really focusing on local government, and it's incredibly important because I think for a lot of people in the Labour Party, people really do feel the future's bright, the future is local, and suddenly local government is sexy. Bear with me, obviously, but it is very, very true, because I think people are sort of thinking, when you look at what's happening in Westminster, where are we going to actually learn the lessons and show the public what we can achieve when we are in power? And that is from our very excellent leaders in local government. We all know devolved power is the big thing in politics. It's been talked about for a long time, but actually you all here, people on the stage, are going to talk about how you actually put that in practice. And I also have another kind of selfish reason why I think local government is so important. We all know the situation in Parliament, particularly for the Labour Party, is very, very, very difficult. And I actually think a lot of our talent is going to come from local government. I think a lot of our big national leaders are going to come from local government in the way that they did in the 1980s. Graham Stringer from Manchester, Jeremy Beecham from Newcastle, etc. So I think a lot of our really, really big stars, I think a lot of the people who potentially will lead us back into power in Westminster will come from local government. So I'm just going to introduce to you the people that you'll be hearing from today. We will first of all be hearing from Alison McGovern, who's been an MP for Wirral South since 2010. She's an absolute star. She's the chair of Progress. She fights very hard in Parliament and outside for lots of equality issues, particularly for women. Did a very, very moving tribute to Jo Cox in the House of Commons recently. Before she came into Parliament, she was a councillor in the borough of Southwark, and she was deputy leader of the Labour group. We will then be hearing from Robin Wales. Robin has promised that he is not going to talk for, what was your time limit, Robin? He made no promises. Robin has served as the mayor in the London borough of Newham since 2002, Before that, he was the leader of Newham City Council from 1995 till 2002. And from 2000 until 2006, he served as the chair of the Association of Local Government. Newham is a really excellent borough, and one of the things I think they champion brilliantly is what they do for young people with access to music, arts, education. They have a campaign called Every Child Matters, Every Child something or other, which is really, really brilliant. And then we have Simon Blackburn, who's the leader of Blackpool Council. He has been a Blackpool councillor since 2003, serving a number of roles in the Cabinet before becoming leader of the opposition in 2010. He's held a number of roles in the Local Government Association, and his current role is the LGA Labour Group Executive Member and Chief Whip. And finally, we are joined by Florence Eshalomi, who is recently been elected a London Assembly Member for Lambeth and Southwark. Big round of applause. Congratulations, congratulations. She's also a former Cabinet Member of Lambeth Council, and she's also a member of the Progress Strategy Board, so I'm sure you get trolled a lot, like everybody else. Right, so without further ado, it's going to be a really, really good day. I'm going to start by asking Alison McGovern to come and take the podium. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayesha, and thanks to everybody for coming. Progress, we're supposed to be the ones who are sort of like telling the Labour Party, don't do it this way, standing up to the rebels. But personally, I've always had a bit of a rebel heart. So I'm going to start off by breaking the rules. Sorry, Richard, but I'm not using the lectern. And this is probably going to screw up all of the recording and everything, but hey-ho. I just want to open by saying a few words. I mean, partly I'm a bit of an imposter in this conference today because this is a conference for, by and about local government. I did serve for 4 years in the London Borough of Southwark, the best borough in London. It is. Led by the fantastic Peter John. And whilst I love representing my hometown in rural in Merseyside, it's a great honour to sit on the green benches of the House of Commons. I realise that the place where things are being done right now, where my party is actually doing what it was set up to do, is in local government, not, I'm afraid, in Westminster. So, with that in mind, I just want to make a remark and then make 3 suggestions as to why I think local government will demonstrate the kind of leadership that our country needs. But before I do so, I just want to remark on the political situation that we find ourselves in, because the last time I addressed a Progress conference, I spoke of the country that I love, that has given my family everything. Every chance, the schools, the NHS, council housing that stopped my dad's family living in a slum in a terrace house in Liverpool. Every single chance my family has had has been given to it by this country and by the Labour Party that built those platforms on which we have stood, and I feel deeply proud of that. But following events recently, I wonder now if my country even wants me anymore. How did we get to that point where my friend would be brutally killed on the streets of her own hometown for doing what we all do, seek to represent the people we love the most? How did we get to that point where the vision that Joe and I share, a country and a continent where it doesn't matter where you're born, but you should have the same chances as anyone else, seems to be lying in tatters? And how did we get to the point where the party that I believe in and want to give my life to seems to have as poor leadership as it has ever had in its history? How have we got to this point? I find it profoundly depressing. So if this conference can do nothing else, please give us all a reason to feel a sense of hope. Now, on that, I do accept my share of the responsibility in the referendum result. My generation has singularly failed the next generation. So, with that in mind, let me make 3 brief suggestions on what we now owe young people in our country. Firstly, to build up the physical assets of this country. We've known for far too long that there is a housing crisis, but it is now being overburdening the shoulders of young people in this country, either because they simply find the idea of ever buying a house too far away to even think of, or because the rent that they have to pay is so excruciating that they can't even enjoy the basics of life. Luckily, local government is coming to the rescue, and my friend Jo Alison is here in the room, who has a compelling vision for housing right across Merseyside. And thankfully, my other good friend, Peter John, is on the other side of the room, who is building council homes just next door in the best borough in London. So I pay tribute to those leaders of local authorities who are already doing this, but I think we need to find new and creative ways to build up the housing stock of our country. And when I recently did a tour of new towns like Corby and Crawley, I found local leaders there who are prepared to get seriously creative in finding the space and the capital to build homes. So we have to get behind that. Secondly, on the kind of emotional assets that we have as a country, the skills that we have to build ourselves up and be the best that we can be, I feel deeply depressed at what the Tories have done to the skills system in this country. Our education curriculum is now narrow, and further education is absolutely depleted. We need a much bigger vision that says, actually, for a lot of places that have poverty, many of the places that voted Leave in the referendum, the biggest factor that holds them back in terms of their economic development is the skill level of the people who live there. So if we do not address it, we will fail. And we owe young people a chance. And finally, let me finish with this, which I think is the most important asset that we need to hand on to the next generation. Yes, the physical assets in our housing, our roads, our railways. Yes, the kind of mental skills and the capacities we have as human beings. But much bigger than that, a vision for our country. We need to set out a version of Britain, a new idea of Britain, something that everyone can be a part of, whether you voted Remain or whether you voted Leave. A story of Britain that means that every family can achieve and that we build the platforms on which they can stand. That is the most important task for the Labour Party now.
Right, well, I'm not quite sure what borough I'm in. I only know that it's the extreme west of London, and who would want to go any further? The other thing is, just when we're agreeing which is the best borough, we have a simple method in Newham of deciding which borough is the best. It's the one with the biggest Labour majority. Guess what? I will say, just an aside, it's something I'm very proud of, something I will make reference to perhaps later. We had, I think, the third lowest turnout in the mayoral election, and that's disappointing. But for our demographics, that's expected. In the local elections, we had the 8th highest turnout in London, which is extraordinary for us. Never done that before. And that, we think, is about badging Newham Labour in terms of what we do locally. And it makes a difference. Even in a place where we're 61-0 and nobody thinks we're going to lose, people will still turn out in bigger numbers because they want to make a statement. Now, I'm going to talk about Newham, obviously, because I think that's the easiest way to do it and explain some of the things we're doing. But let me first of all issue a warning when we talk of local government. When we talk of local government, do we mean Doncaster and Rotherham? No, we don't. But that's just as much local government as any of the good things that are going on. And one of the things I would say is, be very careful when we have no means of comparing. There's some fantastic stuff going on in local government. I'll give you an example. Birmingham, it seems to me, is in denial about its education. When Hackney had that problem, Jules Spike swept stuff away, brought in a trust and fixed his education system. That was responding in a brave way. But instead of that, what we've got in lots of our local government, if we're being honest, we have some poor authorities. We know who they are. We have coasting authorities. That's a large number of authorities. We have projectitis in somewhere where people will do a project here, a project there, but won't change the life of local people. And I had this before the bugger walked in the room. But then you've got some brave places like Southwark, where Peter is taking on and redeveloping places. Despite all the crap he gets from the Guardian, he's trying to make a better place for the people that live there. Now, for me, the question you have to ask is, what vision do we have for local government and for government? Now, if you look at our last government, I mean, did many, many good things, but in the last election, people told us we were out of touch. When they said we're worried about jobs and incomes, we said, don't worry, pre-distribution will solve the problem. Now, that doesn't play to people. When people said we're proud of our country, we're proud to be British, unfortunately then voting for Britain, but they said we're proud, what did we do? We tweeted St George's flags and white vans and turned our nose up at the very people who then voted on Brexit because they didn't trust us. And then, when we said, they told us we must be better as a party, we introduced flash mob leadership. That's what we've got. Flash mobs to determine who our leader and our policies are going to be. That's what we did as a party. No wonder people lose faith in what we're doing, and no wonder they've got concerns. So, I want to talk about the vision we might have. I'll talk about what we're doing in Newham, understand other people will talk about what they're doing, but my challenge would be, at the end of the day, where is the process by which we'll evaluate what we're doing and pick the best things that are going on? Let me tell you a bit about what we're doing in Newham. We believe in having a vision that's based on people. So many years ago, we spent a lot of time going through the party and said, we want the concept of resilience. Build on people's skills. Economic means get a job. Personal, building up the capacities to be able to deal with things. And community. I won't touch on community today, but I could say quite a lot about it. So we believed our job was to support people to help themselves. Recognising the welfare state means people don't starve, but it also means that we've disempowered people. First response people have is, I've got problems, what are you going to do for me, council? That's not true. Most people's first response is, what am I going to do about it? And how do we get to a place where we encourage more of that? So what we did was we said, first principle, we need to get people into employment. We introduced something called Workplace, which starts with the employer. No other work scheme that the government runs starts with the employer. 30,000 people later into work, with the biggest increase in local employment in this country, including bigger than Birmingham or Leeds or places like that. We get 30,000 people. We've seen the biggest switch in terms of increasing employment relative to other areas in the country by a long way. And we did it by starting with employers and then saying, how do we match our people? International competition in London is a problem, but we can outcompete international competition if we give people the right support. We looked at, we did do indeed the Every Child programme that was mentioned earlier, where we started to invest in our people. Every kid gets a free musical instrument and gets taught to grade 1. It's 2 million quid, but so what? If it's good enough for the middle classes, it's certainly good enough for my kids. We take them to the theatre, we take them to the, we get them sports, we're doing Do Every Child a Dancer. In different ways. It isn't just about education results, which, by the way, in London have been absolutely spectacular over the last 20 years, and we have not done enough and said enough as a party to claim the credit that we deserve for that. We've recognised that we need to, we brought in free school meals, recognising it's worth £500 for every child before tax. That was about supporting people who are working hard. On housing, we said, no, we're getting rid of all the nonsense. You have to wait your turn. We went to the High Court and said, we want people to wait their turn and we'll prioritise employment. And then we brought in private sector licensing, where we're prosecuting 800 landlords, more landlords being prosecuted in Newham than the rest of the country put together, because it says to people, we care about the conditions you live in. When 23 Romanians were found in one 3-bedroom house, it says something both about the conditions they're expected to live in and what it does for the community. Now, if you put that together, jobs, we also, by the way, went to the last Labour government and said, could we enforce the minimum wage? 21% of people in my borough are not paid the minimum wage. 21%. And when we went to a Labour government and said, let us enforce it along with the GMB for fun, they said no. They said no to us. And well, I was going to be critical of Ed Miliband, but he did such a good job for us, I don't think I need to criticise him very much. So, if you take that, if you think about it, what we were saying was, we can outcompete international competition. If we drive up wage rates, people can't work for lower rates, and we won't let people live in housing that's disgusting for very low rates. That's how you compete in terms of immigration, which every one of us knows is a big issue, but which the party ran away from. That's why we lost the Brexit vote, because we had run away for years from the issues people were talking to us about. And that is a power local government has. We are closer to things by and large. However, I still had one member of my group say the other day, it's nothing to do with immigration. And one member of a group who's actually here who said, Yes, it is. We think there are ways of doing things differently, but we've got to talk about that. One of the great achievements of the last Labour government was pushing up the standards in public service by introducing performance measures, and it drove it up to a standard. But to take it further is actually very challenging, and it's a debate we need to be having. It's not enough the way we do things. There are ways of delivering differently. There are ways that we can empower workers, remove middle managers, and we're producing a pamphlet on how we see the failures of management in terms of what happens in local government and in government service generally. So I'd love to talk about that. I suspect we won't have time. In the meantime, I think it's fairly clear that local government is much better when it's doing well. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, how honest are we going to be with ourselves when we say, actually, that's not very good, that's what's working, that's what we should be doing. If we're prepared to do that, then we can have a whole different offer for the next time we go into an election. But that means honesty not only with government, but honesty within local government as well.
One very close friend of mine, I was worried at one point in Wetherspoons, was going to whip out the birth certificates of his whippets and testimonials from his flat cap suppliers. The point I made to him and have made to others is that that isn't what matters. What matters, of course, is our ability to understand what our value base is and what our particular take on socialist or social democratic ideology is, and to analyse the extent to which that helps or hinders us. Some of the most value-driven, successful, practical and in-touch politicians I know have deeply working-class northern backgrounds, while conversely, some of the most ideologically fixed and dogmatic people I know are multi-millionaires from North London. Before the people outside break in through the windows, I have no particular borough in mind. President Obama writes about listening to a Republican in the Illinois Senate getting irate over a plan to provide school breakfasts to primary-age children on the basis that it would crush their spirit of self-reliance. Obama pointed out that he didn't know many self-reliant 5-year-olds, but that he did know a lot of hungry kids who had or would one day end up in the care of the state. He tells how the bill was defeated, as he puts it, temporarily saving children from the debilitating effects of cereal and milk, until he later successfully introduced it, and remarks that values are faithfully applied to the facts before us, whilst ideology ignores facts which call it into question. It was our value base in Blackpool that Cyril introduced school breakfast to all primary school children in 2013, faced with the facts of poor school attendance, poor exam results, poor behaviour and hungry kids.
I do enjoy listening to
It was
Robin
ideology
speak.
that
But I always
caused the
think it'd be much
Conservative
better
Party
if he just got off
to
the fence
oppose
and
it
said what he
and
really
to try and ring-test it. 3
Maybe
years
one
on, We serve 1.5
colleagues,
million
in politics,
a year.
it's very difficult to separate the execution of a task.
Our value base
and the
informed the
value base
decision to reduce the number of senior council staff
into the
from
public
36
policy sphere.
to 9. It informed our decision to invest in building projects and public transport capital spending, which have a ruthless focus on creating jobs and bringing income to what is a very poor town. Our value base informed our decision to pull down bedsits and one-bedroom flats that were making council tenants' lives a misery and rebuild quality homes. Our value base, which has overseen one of the most comprehensive and successful programmes of selective and additional licensing, which is driving bad landlords out of town. Our value base means that we are just about to recruit our third cohort of young people with learning disabilities, because we couldn't live with the fact that 93% of them were destined to spend their life unemployed. Does that mean we've abandoned our ideology? Of course not. Does it mean we're relaxed about TTIP? Are we all in favour of Trident? And are we perfectly happy with the situation in the Middle East? No. Now more than ever, people are looking for value-based political, practical leadership. Communities up and down the UK do not know what the future holds, but they're pretty sure that the bad guys have got a boost as a result of the EU referendum result. We as a party now need to think about how we deal with working class voters who may well have been Labour voters their entire lives, but have always been to the right of us on certain social issues. Many of them have chosen to lend their support to the Leave campaign. I want them to be shown some national leadership now from a Remainer. Someone who can competently and confidently reassure them that we hear what they have said, that we are not going to pretend that uncontrolled immigration is, or ever was, practical and manageable. But at the same time, we will deal swiftly and decisively with anyone who uses the current situation to engage in hate speech, racism, bigotry, or worse. I want to hear national leadership that talks about the future, that has a plan of action to deal with the social and economic crises that are barrelling towards those who are least resilient and least able to withstand that storm. How are we going to ensure that our children have jobs when they leave school? How will we ensure that pensions and savings are protected? How will we ensure that further damaging public sector cuts do not take place? That taxation isn't hiked? That housing remains, or in places like London, becomes affordable and accessible? And how do we make sure that supermarket shopping, getting the bus, putting petrol in the car, don't become beyond the capacity of single parents and pensioners? Colleagues, if by the autumn that national leadership isn't a bit more apparent than it is today, don't imagine that local and regional Labour Party leaders will be able to fill that void for much longer. We are here, colleagues, with hundreds of examples of best practice. We are here with our chequebook as the biggest individual funder of the Labour Party. But most of all, we are here with our values, which are shared by the electorate. At this moment in time, some people's ideology isn't putting food on the table, but our values are.
Welcome to my weekly world. But thoroughly enjoying it. She's 16 months going on 16 years. And I've been told that it does get easier as they get older. And more expensive. Oh, no? Oh gosh. I wasn't actually going to attend this morning, and when Richard texted me to say, could you come along, I thought, oh gosh, what am I going to say? And then just looking at the agenda, I was hoping to come along later on in the afternoon. But driving along here this morning, I was thinking, what am I going to say today? And just going through the agenda again, looking at, what can local government teach the Labour Party? And it brought me back to actually think about when I first put myself forward to stand. I'm a lifelong Lambeth resident, lived in Brixton all my life. And when I think back to 10 years ago, in May 2006, as a bleary-eyed 25-year-old, winning in Brixton Hill, just that sense of joy, that sense of pride. And I go back to 2006, the reality was that wasn't a great time for our party nationally, if you'll remember, on the back of a gruelling 2005 general election where, we clung on, but yes, we did win, but we'd lost a number of votes. And then to sort of go out again across London, where we had all-out elections, was quite a difficult challenge. But I thought it would be good to go back and draw parallels on what we can learn and what we should learn from local government. So in 2006, we saw that, here in Lambeth, we were dominated by and being led by a right-wing Tory and Lib Dem coalition. It was fashionable then, before they won office in 2010. And the reality was that Labour had lost in Lambeth because they'd been out of touch with local residents. They hadn't listened. But we had a clear message as Team Labour in 2006, a message about what we were offering Lambeth residents, and a clear dividing line between us and the Tory and Lib Dem coalition that were currently stuck in the town hall. Our manifesto is quite simple, but yet quite ambitious. We wanted to deliver quality and value for money for Lambeth residents, whilst we tackled the inequality and social exclusion across Lambeth. Our priorities were residents' priorities because we spent quite a lot of time going out of the town hall, going out into community groups, listening to what residents. So it was their priorities as well. And it was clear to make sure we had priorities which would translate into manifesto commitments that we could deliver on, and how we would deliver on them if and when we were elected. We also had a team of candidates in 2006 that looked like the residents across Lambeth. Before I got elected in 2006, in a borough here in Lambeth, where our population is probably about 43% BME, out of 63 councillors on Lambeth Council, only 3 were from a BME background, 3. And it's a case of the reality is that if we don't have elected representatives that look and sound like the residents they're seeking to represent, it makes it really hard when we're then developing manifesto and policy commitments which will have such a big impact on their lives. And Labour up and down the country is leading the way on that. And then for some of you that remember the old inspection regime with the Audit Commission where we had the one-star councils, back then Lambeth was a one-star failing council. But under 2 years we excelled into a 3-star improving council. And that again demonstrated the corporate need for us as an organisation with our staff to deliver on some of those key manifesto pledges. And if we fast forward to 2010 and 2014, where we've seen the real-term cuts to local government grant falling by 40% in some areas, and instead of retreating to a blame culture and endless protesting, local government is still delivering on some of their key pledges and manifestos, still delivering for their residents. Councils have had to transform the way in which they deliver services to local residents. And any councillor here or outside will tell you that actually, as the funding shrinks, the demand for services and expectations for residents grows. They still come kicking and screaming on the door thinking you've got this endless pool of money, and you're like, actually, how are we going to continue delivering those services knowing that our budget has been cut day in, day out? And up and down the country, we see councils responding to that challenge, whether it's in Oldham, whether it's in Blackpool, whether it's in Haringey, or whether it's in Southwark, or Manchester or in Bury. Local government are continuing to lead the way on how we deliver tough financial services and still go out and win in elections. And there's another thing that I want to touch on about local government leading the way and where I think the Labour Party nationally can definitely learn from. It breaks my heart that in a matter of weeks the Tories are going to elect their second female leader. And nationally we're led by men. No disrespect to the men here, you're fantastic. Welcome to the sisterhood. But the reality is that, we don't reflect a good party nationally. But in local government, it's a different story. We see some fantastic female leaders An example is here in Lambeth, where we're led by Lib. My colleague Sarah Hayward in Camden, Claire Cober in Haringey, who's now just been elected the chair of London Councils, taken over from Jules Pipe, or Jean Stratton in Oldham, or Sharon Taylor in Stevenage. It's about saying local government has always stepped up to the plate in terms of making sure, we're representing. And also in terms of leading the way when there are tough elections coming up. It's our councillors that are the bedrock of those elections. Councillors going up and down, not just staying in their own communities when there's not elections. So whether it's councillors from London going out and helping on by-elections, councillors from neighbouring boroughs helping colleagues during some of those third elections. It's about showing that solidarity across the local government family. And it's about saying, actually, if we're really honest, even under a Labour government sometimes, local government weren't favourable. Sometimes they didn't listen to our local government leaders. We had to fight to get a place to attend shadow cabinet meetings. We sometimes didn't get a look in terms of cabinet meetings. Again, you see the Tories always, making sure they recognise their local government leaders. The amount of local government leaders that have been honoured and, given OBEs, MBEs, and then gone to the Lords, whereas in Labour we could count the amount of people that have gone through the House of Lords. So it's about saying, as we go forward, if we are really serious about the challenges facing us nationally as Labour, if we are really serious about saying we don't want to see Labour wiped out nationally in the next few years, it's about saying come and talk to local government, see how they're doing it, see how they're responding at times when there's no money, see how they're continuing to develop new talent and new councillors, see how they're going out and talking to their communities, not just sitting around moaning saying, oh, why us? If we want that challenge to become real, it's about making sure local government continues to have a place in those discussions, not as a last add-on addition when we're thought of. And it's about saying we have to win because we work better when we have local government led by a national Labour government. All the issues that we're seeing now, it's only going to get worse for us. Councillors up and down the country will tell you that, the difficulties they're facing, it's doubled by the fact that we've got a Tory government nationally. There's some light for us in London where we've now got a Labour mayor, but even so it's still quite difficult because the challenge across London where we've got some Tory boroughs who we're going to have to work with collaboratively. But my challenge to all of you today is about making sure that we continue to champion local government, we continue to champion our national leaders, we continue to champion why it is important to make sure local government have a seat in that, in discussions for our party going forward. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much to all our speakers. And we're now going to open the discussion up to the floor. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to put to the panel, please do. There's a roving mic that will go around. Okay, Peter, John, then.
Well, it's really picking up on that point that Fred made about why we've not had a woman leader, and what is it about Labour politics which seems to hold women back from becoming our national leader. It is showing, as you said, that the Tories will have their second woman leader and Prime Minister, and we haven't really got close to that. What is it about our politics? Is it because, I don't know, is there something about the aggression of the left, something that means that puts women off? I don't know. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
People don't vote for them. That's the problem. Peter, you know me well enough to know that aggression would hardly hold me back. Especially, given the kind of robustness of the Commons even now. I think it's a simple fact that people don't vote for them. So when we had our leadership election last summer, there was two facts that were alarmingly clear that the women in those elections did strikingly worse than men, and that Jeremy Corbyn, with a very similar ideological platform, did strikingly better than Diana. So, in some senses, having worked with Labour Women's Network, which men in the room might not be aware of, but women in the room will know that Labour Women's Network invests very heavily in the skills of women to make sure that they can become both councillors and members of Parliament, assembly members, what have you. there is an electoral test that we just keep failing. So the question, I think, can't really be answered by people like me. It can only be answered by people who vote in those elections. There's probably not one factor, but there is a kind of underlying view that the Labour Party doesn't seem to want to be led by a woman. So we will have to keep going and trying to change the voters' mind.
I don't know. What would you no.
I don't know. I voted for women last time. I voted for 2 women last time. I thought Yvette was way the strongest candidate and way the best person. I voted for her. I expected Commerce to do the same. Clearly, some people didn't, and I think current leadership is clearly not got any sympathy with the idea of having strong, good, capable, competent women. I understand why people vote for Jeremy rather than Diane. I have to say, I would. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I mean, I just want to sort of add I worked for a long time for Harriet Harman, who, of course, was a great champion of women in the Labour Party. And when all women shortlists were introduced, there was obviously a lot of controversy about them, and there still continues to be controversy about them. As Alison sort of said, there is something in the Labour Party where we do find it hard to win, because when we took those positive action measures away, things would slip back. That's what's happened in Scotland, and we've seen it in other things. And I think there is something cultural about the Labour Party which is a really, really uncomfortable truth. We pride ourselves on being a party of equality and women, and yet we have some structural, cultural issue about voting for women leaders. And it does break my heart that now the Conservatives will be having 2 women. But let's be honest about it, there's also a kind of need that just because you're a woman, you're a feminist, which absolutely, Margaret Thatcher left an all-male cabinet and sort of, dragged the ladder up behind you. It is interesting, we've got 2 women, one of whom is talking about supporting foreign nationals, the other one is talking about scrapping maternity rights for women who work in small businesses. But we as a Labour Party have got to, I think, really, really hard at ourselves about why are these reasons. And particularly, we have a new membership now, we have a new culture of misogyny in the Labour Party. I was talking with a female MP, and she was saying to me, we used to get together to talk about the pay gap and childcare. Lots of women MPs get together and very painfully talk about what death threats they've had that day, what rape threats they've had that day, what threats on their children they've had that day. So we have got a very big cultural issue to address in the Labour Party, and I don't think it's going to be easy to fix. Does anyone want to say anything?
No, just to add to that, in terms of experiences that female MPs are receiving, it's been happening to female councillors. So I think back to when I was on the cabinet in 2010, before Twitter broke out, where really difficult decisions were having to take locally, where openly people are calling for you to resign, we're getting death threats. One of my colleagues in Lambeth, who's leading on the libraries portfolio, again, some of the really, really horrific abuse she's been receiving. And it's about making sure as Labour, we're quite clear in terms of zero tolerance on that. Because if we're all honest, we know that there's been instances where that's coming from Labour members, and we should call that out where we know it's happened and not tolerate that, because it's no good us saying, we want to have a party where there's unity, where there isn't an neighbourhood, but when it's happening from our own members, we should be clear in terms of calling that out. And I think the other thing is around making sure we support women who want to come forward. The reality shows that, whether it's in local government and in Parliament, when it comes up for re-election or people standing down, it's mainly women who think, actually, I've had enough of this. This wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And 9 out of 10 times, if we're not careful, those seats, whether it's council seats or MP seats, is then ring-fenced to be AWS or women shortlist. It will be a man that will take over. So again, it's about making sure we don't get complacent and we've solved the issue around representation and gender balance, because we're long way off from that. So it's about making sure we continue to learn and mentor and nurture our women coming forward in the next generation.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that the battle for the leadership of the National Labour Party is about the size of their mandate. I don't know what you're reading about. My mandate's bigger than yours. But I'm constantly astounded by the levels of timidity within the party around all women shortlists and around quotas, because quotas work. The problem is that the Labour Party goes around making sure that in every winnable seat in a local government election, 50% of the candidates are women. They then piss off and don't do anything else. There's no follow-up to that. So nobody ever asks me or challenges me about the membership of my cabinet. I have to actively go out there and point out that we have a gender-balanced cabinet in Blackpool, that more than 50% of my cabinet members associate themselves as being members of the LGBT community. Nobody asks those questions. Nobody looks at the senior management teams in local councils that are Labour run to see if there are women at the top of those structures. We have a responsibility in all of the structures that we have influence over to make sure that equality runs all the way through them. And very few people are making those arguments.
I just want to add one final thing before we go to some other questions. The point that you were raising, Simon, in your talk about how a lot of leaders, particularly in national government, were basically elite, Oxbridge, North London, kind of a small class and a small group of people. That is very, very, very clear and evident in terms of the advisors, those very important backroom jobs that shape the sort of mission of the party, the policies of the party, the culture of the party. They're people that we all know are very, very powerful, not elected from a very, very small pool of people. So as well as getting more women, we need more people from ethnic minority communities, and we need more people from not just London, from all across the country, and we need more people from a different social class as well, because one of the reasons we've become so disconnected from people is because a lot of the people making the decisions and shaping the culture and the message of this party are incredibly disconnected from a very, very small pool of people. Right, can we take some more? Okay, so I think I'll do 3, and then we'll do it. So, lady in the green dress, and then afterwards go to the gentleman behind, and then we'll go to the lady here.
Hi there, Jane Everett from Lambeth. I think that when we were last in government, we had a really, really radical vision around devolution, but kind of left the story half told. And now the Tories are basically taking up the ground in terms of being the party that's actually championing localism. So I suppose what were your views in terms of actually exciting policies that we should be adopting to really devolve power? Because as Robin said earlier, actually we've been able to show local government that where we deliver services, we've been able to do them in an excellent way and more efficiently. And I'd like to see the WP, in fact, devolve down to local government.
Question, Barry Kenman, London Borough Parrot. The question before us is what can government, the National Labour Party, learn from local government? In my experience of representing the Edgware Ward for just over 2 years now, is that we're losing the battle on the environment in terms of the problem of the street scene and flight tipping, which makes voters in my area extremely angry, and I hear nothing from the national leadership about that issue. Secondly, understandably, with Labour, I'm a retired, as Robin knows, I'm a retired local government housing officer. But to me, the battle now is the management and the dealing with private rented sector. That is the growth, that is where the problems are, enormous problems in the area I represent. And the third thing that can be learned is what my colleague from Lambeth said, but I will go stronger. We really need to be the party of devolution. My view is nothing good comes out of Whitehall and Westminster, and it needs to be run down.
Nobody asks those questions. Nobody looks at the senior management teams in local councils that are Labour run to see if there are women at the top of those structures. We have a responsibility in all of the structures that we have influence over to make sure that equality runs all the way through them. And very few people are making those arguments.
I just want to add one final thing before we go to some other questions. The point that you were raising, Simon, in your talk about how a lot of leaders, particularly in national government, were basically elite, Oxbridge, North London, kind of a small class and a small group of people. That is very, very, very clear and evident in terms of the advisors, those very important backroom jobs that shape the sort of mission of the party, the policies of the party, the culture of the party. They're people that we all know are very, very powerful, not elected from a very, very small pool of people. So as well as getting more women, we need more people from ethnic minority communities, and we need more people from not just London, from all across the country, and we need more people from a different social class as well, because one of the reasons we've become so disconnected from people is because a lot of the people making the decisions and shaping the culture and the message of this party are incredibly disconnected from a very, very small pool of people. Right, can we take some more? Okay, so I think I'll do three, and then we'll do it. So, lady in the green dress, and then afterwards we'll go to the gentleman behind, and then we'll go to the lady here.
Hi there, Jane Everett from Lambeth. I think that when we were last in government, we had a really, really radical vision around devolution that kind of left the story half told. And now the Tories are basically taking up the ground in terms of being the party that's actually championing localism. So I suppose what were your views in terms of actually exciting policies that we should be adopting to really devolve power? Because as Robin said earlier, actually we've been able to show local government that where we deliver services, we've been able to do them in an excellent way and more efficiently. And I'd like to see the WP, in fact, devolve down to local government.
Question, Barry Kendall, London Borough Para. The question before us is what can government, or the National Labour Party, learn from local government? In my experience of representing the Edgware Ward for just over 2 years now, is that we're losing the battle on the environment in terms of the problem of the street scene and flight tipping, which makes voters in my area extremely angry, and I hear nothing from the national leadership about that issue. Secondly, understandably, with Labour, I'm retired, as Robin knows, I'm a retired local government housing officer. But to me, the battle now is the management and the dealing with private rented sector. That is the growth, that is where the problems are, enormous problems in the area I represent. And the third thing that can be learned is what my colleague from Lambeth said, but I would go stronger. We really need to be the party of devolution. My view is nothing good comes out of Whitehall and Westminster, and it needs to be run down. When I was working for Waltham Forest, as Robin will remember, who told us what key workers are? Tony Blair and the DC and the ODPM, Mr. Prescott. What in the bloody hell does a Prime Minister and a Deputy Prime Minister know what key workers are? Let's decentralise, let's put power into either regional or local government.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, and lady at the front here.
Ruthie Reagan from Hendon. It seems like a plan B of the Labour after the results of the Brexit. It's despair, losing the way, crying all the time, saying, oi, 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 we missed it, we didn't get it. And in that way, I'm afraid we are losing the majority who wanted the Brexit. And we are not offering any hope, not talking about the crisis in the leadership, that most of the people are against the leadership, but they are coming down to the numbers, like new members are joining the party, which I didn't see them, but it's all the time saying that. So it might be a split as well in the Labour. That's what we're talking. And I think that the local government has a very important role here. First, to offer hope and to offer something really constructive to what is happening after the Brexit. And secondly, to be more influential about the leadership.
Okay, thanks very much. Robin, do you want to start?
Thank you. You asked the question, what can the national government learn from the local government? The answer is nothing, because they don't listen to a word that anybody tells them. Not at all. If I had a pound for every time I had a minister or somebody who was coming down, looking, saying, that very, very good, very excellent, and then going away and doing nothing that would in any way carry it through, I would not be here, I'd be in the Tory party, because I'd be independently wealthy, right? Yeah, it's clear. Devolution should come down to us, give us public health. We made a fortune out of public health and did more public health work than had been done in the last 20 years, because we made things like, one of my points about public health, the best thing you can do for public health is help people into work. To get a job is the best thing you can do. If we get 30,000 people into work and there's not for public health, what's a nutty place are we sitting in? So, yeah, we should devolve. But I've kind of come to a more radical position, which is I don't care anymore. I've got to get independent and away from the requirements of government grant and government so we can do what we want. We're going to be building 15,000 homes in the next few years. We expect to make billions of pounds of profits because we're going to rent them at private rent sector profits and use some of that for affordability. And then nobody will tell us who key workers are. We'll decide who they are. Nobody will tell us how you have to control your waiting lists in council housing, because they won't be council housing the same way. They'll be ours, and we'll be able to control them. And I think one of the things local government has to do is demand devolution. I think with Osborne potentially going, I don't think that's in any sense a done game. Nobody wants it in government except the Treasury. And then we're working with DWP on skills and sort of employment and health. They're desperate not to do anything. They really don't get it. Civil service is just a drain and a draw on everything. So I say the answer is to say, yeah, give us health, give us employment. Employment. At the time we got DWP to get 350 young people into work, we got 1,400 into work with workplace with not a penny from government. We can do it. Of course local government can do it. We'll do it to a budget. We won't overspend. We'll do it well. We won't do it brilliantly, because I don't think we've taken that next step. I think the last Labour government took us to a standard of public delivery that most of us now get, and that's really good. And it's certainly better than the government manages to do. But to take it to the next step is a big debate we should have. But beyond that, for me, I want to get independence. I want to find money. And I found interesting in every child musician. When we went to schools and said, we'll pay for it, never mind you've got a huge budget in education. Thank you, Labour government. They didn't think that should be paid for. But once we paid for it, they'd do it. So for me, it's getting some independence of income. That's why we invested in the Olympic Stadium. Thank you for that, by the way. £40 million loan to the Mayor of London, and we get it back with interest and 35% of profits and community days and all sorts of things. Thank you for that, London. We do appreciate it. Invest in things that will make money and use that for the future and get some degree of independence, which I just don't trust national government at all.
How do we pick up on the Labour independence issue about the sort of Plan B people, how do we connect with the people who did vote for Leave? How do we show that sort of national leadership?
Sure, I will. Listening to all Robin says, I feel absolutely loath to sit here and defend Westminster on Whitehall. Anyway, not least because my great policy for reform in Westminster was to move the whole circus to St George's Hall in Liverpool. Because not just because it would make my life a lot nicer, but because I think part of the culture that exists is exactly as you said earlier, Ayesha, which is a small, tight-knit group of people who quite like faffing about in Westminster and Whitehall and talking to each other, and they're not very interested in the rest of the country. So I think we have to break that culture. That said, the last Labour government did do devolution in England. It just did it for London and stopped there. And the same arguments that existed for citywide government in London apply to Manchester, to Liverpool, to Birmingham, to Sheffield and South Yorkshire, to Leeds and West Yorkshire. Those arguments applied, and we never took those steps. And I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you slightly, Robin, because George Osborne might like turning up in his hard hat and high vis and looking like he might build a few things. But the Treasury view is still against the kind of independence that you suggest. And it is the tenacity and brilliant leadership of our local government leaders that has made devolution move forward. But what Labour has to do now is to work out how even more that we can support that and recognise it and give our cities the power to run themselves. So in that we don't disagree. I just don't have any faith in the Treasury as a corporate entity to deliver it. But I would just say, Barry from Harrow, you are absolutely right about the environment. When I was a local councillor in Southwark, I was trying to encourage other people to become a local councillor. And one of my colleagues in the Labour Party was thinking about it, and then he said to me, the thing is, I really care about big political issues, and I just think being a local councillor, you have to deal with potholes and things. And I said to him, the thing you have to understand is, if you care about big political issues, you should care about what the public are interested in, and they are interested in potholes. If you can't talk about potholes, you're just not a very good politician. So I completely agree with you there. And finally, on how do we speak to the people who voted leave? I think in my contribution, I was trying to make the point there that I suppose people like me had, in some sense, misunderstood the country that we thought we lived in. It does grieve me, but there are two options, right? You either kind of leave your values to one side, but as has been said by Simon, that is not possible when you're involved in politics. So we have to talk to those people, listen to them, understand them, talk to them on their doorstep, and recognise that our values apply to everybody. It doesn't matter if they voted leave or remain. Our values that you should be able to be and do all the things that you might want, and that there should be no barrier in your way, that the Labour movement is there to create the kind of institutions that help you live out all of your hopes and dreams. Those values apply to the people who voted leave. We just have to work out what the new institutions are, what the new, whether it's a renewed idea about what housing can be in this country, or a new version of how city regions might grasp further education and make it properly deliver skills for everybody, whether they're 6 or 60, or if it's creating a sense of identity around cities or counties or wherever we are, that everybody could truly feel a part of. I think, Robin, you were saying about Newham Labour and the strength of that, and people wanting to vote for it, even though they were going to add not a single extra councillor. Wanting to vote for that. I've seen that. I've seen Joe do it in Liverpool with Liverpool Labour. It's exactly what Peter did when I was part of his team, and sort of create an identity that people can feel a part of, and then I think we'll win their support.
Just before I pass on to Simon, just to pick up on the point that you're making about the 52%, which I think is really important, that everyone knows we're an incredibly divided sort of Britain at the moment, and it does feel like it's kind of London and the rest. And I voted to remain. I was not happy with the results, especially because I was in a room with Nigel Farage, Douglas Carr as well, and Boris Johnson's dad, and Nadine Dorries. And I'll tell you what, weird being in a room with Stanley Johnson is your closest political ally. Really, that is weird. But as much as me and a lot of my friends and a lot of us here who have kind of the shared cultural values and stuff are horrified, you can't just write off everyone who voted leave as being either thick, provincial or racist. You just can't. And lots of my middle class friends in London are like, oh my God, I cannot believe it, my voice was not heard, how did this happen? It's that's how a lot of other people have been feeling about things for a very, very long time. So I think part of Labour's response is to be very careful about how we reconnect with those people and just not kind of criticise them or write them off and put fingers in the ears. Okay, Simon.
Thanks. I think with certain honourable exceptions, Westminster is one big advert for devolution. and it's timely because the Shadow Combined Authority for Lancashire meets for the first time on Monday. That's an authority that I hope to chair, fingers crossed. But when this has happened before, when the first major devolution deal was announced in Greater Manchester, within 24 hours we had several union leaders and Andy Burnham on the television criticising it. Now Andy Blassing seems to have had some sort of dancing conversion because he's decided that to be mayor of an area like Greater Manchester requires cabinet level experience, and he's done that. And the critique seems to be around it'll destroy the National Health Service. It'll lead to differences in the way in which services are delivered. Of course it will lead to differences in which services are delivered. That's the point. That's the point of local government. It's about that principle of subsidiarity, about decisions being taken at the right level. So yes, the NHS faces a huge financial black hole. But do I want Joe Anderson dealing with that on Merseyside? Do I want Tony Lloyd dealing with that in Manchester? Do I want Sadiq Khan dealing with that in London? Or do I want whoever on earth heads up NHS England dealing with it? I think the answer is fairly clear.
make sure, at the same time we're championing to get additional responsibility, we need to make sure the money's coming with it. So there's a big discussion around whether or not councils retain their business rates, and the long discussions around policy of council tax rebound. We do need to resolve those going forward. I think in terms of what you cited on the environment, Barry, it's really important, and I'll use the example of what Sadiq's doing in City Hall, where actually we've seen some of the key manifesto pages around dealing with the environment, which, if we're all honest, it sometimes doesn't get enough airplay or coverage. It doesn't seem like it's sexy, but it's actually something that will affect all of us. And something like air quality in London, where we're seeing just under 9,000 people die annually from poor air quality. We're seeing the mayor responding to that by saying, actually, it's about getting tough on those polluting vehicles. I'll be honest and say I'm a driver in London, and my vehicle's probably one of those, so I have to look at changing that. It's about saying, the vanity project for money that Boris wasted on his buses, which is still polluting our streets. But Sadiq responded to that, and making sure that we work with councils to tackle some of those big environmental challenges we face. And on your point in terms of Brexit, one thing that I think we should definitely look at as well, and it's something around the fact that if we go back to 2005 with general election around BNE voters, Lambeth was the top Remain borough in London with just under 79%. Again, I cited we're a very diverse borough. But if you look at one of the top Labour lead boroughs, Barking and Dagenham, a very large West African population, my family from West Africa, and campaigning across Lambeth and Suffolk, the two boroughs I now represent, the reality was on the doorstep, a lot of those people said they were voting to leave. And it's about us as a Labour Party looking at how we respond to their concerns. It's not just a case of us doing immigration, no. It's about looking at why they felt the need to vote to leave. A number of them were telling me, actually, my children can't get jobs, they can't get schools, they can't afford to buy houses. And for me, as a British Nigerian, born here, raised here, but responding back to them and saying, this is not because of the migrants, but we do understand your concerns. It's about the fact that housing is so unaffordable in certain parts of London. It's about the fact that people are now commuted so much more to jobs because their fares are so expensive. It's about saying, what can we do to tackle those issues? So we've got to be very careful not to demonise and attack everyone who voted leave in London, because there were a large number of Labour voters who did vote to leave.
Richard, how are we doing for time? Have we got?
You're over the line.
Oh, right. Okay. I think that means we're over. So listen, please.